Greetings sailors and welcome to a first look at HMNLS, Zeven Provinciën. This is of course the current dockyard ship, the latest tier 8 premium cruiser to be added to the game, and also, generally speaking, not a bad ship. It has some really nice qualities to it. It's not quite as good as when we had it for testing. It did receive one or two moderate and minor nerfs, but overall it's still a pretty reasonable tier 8 light cruiser. And I have to say, compared to some of the other dockyard ships we've had, this feels like it has been put out in a pretty balanced fashion. It doesn't feel like it has been unnecessarily gimped just because it's a dockyard ship. And let's not forget, dockyard ships are not ships that you can fully grind out for free. You're still going to have to pay some doubloons at a minimum in order to get this thing. So unlike the very earliest dockyard ships where that was the case, and of course then we had the whole Puerto Rico shit show, these days Wargaming is at least a bit more upfront with the fact that, yeah, they want to make some money with these events, but it's still an opportunity to get yourself a relatively cheap premium. And in this case, it also does tie in quite well with the rest of the Dutch light cruisers, which is basically everything up to tier 7. Because of course, tier 8, you get the one and only with the 8-inch guns, and then after that, you get bigger guns subsequently. Although I can't remember the exact calibers, but, you know, bigger. So what we have is a very post-war looking ship, but it was actually laid down in 1940. Of course, the fall of the Netherlands slightly interrupted work on this and its sister ship, but post-war they were completed and commissioned and actually had a really, really long service life, both with the Dutch Navy and then subsequently when they were sold to the Peruvian Navy. And I think it's the Zeven Provinciën itself that is now preserved as a museum ship in the form of the, I think it's the Almirante Grau, I think. This is going off memory, I haven't specifically looked this up beforehand. But yeah, it's always nice to see ships that exist as a museum ship being brought to the game. So, you know, it's a historically existing ship, even if it doesn't really have a history in terms of World War II, other than just being sat uncompleted in an occupied Dutch dockyard. As for characteristics, well, we have got some quite nice ones, to be honest. The guns aren't super amazing. I mean, they are 6-inch guns, although they are dual purpose, the main battery, so we'll talk about AA in a bit, but, you know, this thing does put out some very meaty AA. They have a base of, where is it, 11% fire chance, which is pretty good for 6-inch guns, and the velocity is also pretty reasonable, so they're not particularly floaty, as you find with some light cruisers, although that wouldn't be that big of an issue even if it did, because the range isn't fantastic. The range of the guns is, what, 16 point something kilometers? 16.6 kilometers overall, and as it's a tier 8, you don't have any way to extend that. However, tying in with that is the fact that it has got really good concealment, and that's generally a feature of the Dutch cruisers overall. They tend to have good concealment, so despite the fact that this has got quite a tall superstructure with that radar dish on top, which isn't actually, sadly, a radar in-game, that would be kind of nice, but also a bit overpowered. But yeah, despite it being a tall ship, you can get it down to 9.3 kilometers if you go for maximum stealth. What I've done here, though, is me using Concealment Expert on the captain, but actually going with double rudder shift for the extra maneuverability, and that gets the rudder shift down to a really tight 5.4 seconds. So you have that option. That is always nice when you have ships with a good base stealth, where you have that option. A lot of the other Dutch cruisers are the same. The Harlem is certainly the same at Tier 8. Of course, Tier 8 is the first one where you can go for that double rudder shift. Alternatively, in that last slot, you could also take the Ship Consumables Modification 1, which would give you a boost to both your engine boost consumable and your heal. This gets a heal, which is always really nice on a Tier 8 cruiser, and honestly I wish more cruisers overall had heals. It would certainly come into play in this game. So overall, being sneaky is really a useful feature on any cruiser, but especially when you don't have a great range, and being sneaky and fast makes for a really nice combination. And you add on top of all of that, and you might have noticed this, both sets of turrets, fore and aft, are fully traversable. And you look at the room at the back and it looks like, okay, the turrets definitely have room to turn around there, like some of the German light cruisers. But if you look at the front ones, they actually, I think you see it during this replay even, but the barrels lift up far enough that the front ones can turn all the way around as well, which is really nice. This encounter, by the way, with Massachusetts was a bit weird and a bit unusual in that normally, in this kind of situation, if you're in the cruiser, an enemy battleship will tend to just focus you because you are the squishier target, and in this case I am the more fire-setting target. However, this Massachusetts decided to really focus hard on the Vladivostok, except for when I was presenting a very vulnerable broadside. So, yeah, bit weird, bit unusual. Certainly most games are not going to be like this, I hasten to add, as I'm sure anyone that's played a light cruiser will realise. So concealment is good, the guns are okay, the speed is good. As you will have seen, you've got the speed boost, the base speed itself, 32 knots, and you can get that up to 33 point something. Hang on, I've actually got WoWS FT open on the other page. 33.6 with the speed boost. It goes in a straight line to over 36 knots. I don't know if you can quite reach 37 knots. It's a useful little kick of engine power, basically, and it's maybe even more useful for keeping your speed up during manoeuvring rather than chasing somebody down. Although there are occasions when you will be able to do that as well. Possibly lastly, I don't know if there's much else to talk about in terms of the rest of the everything. I lost my words for a second there. I don't know why. Is the airstrike. Now, of course, this is the theme of the Dutch cruisers, and you kind of have to think of this as being almost like torpedoes. Kind of. They fulfill the same function as torpedoes in that they're going to be useful sometimes, but not all the time. These do have a good range. It's, I think, 13 kilometers. You've got very decent fire chance with them, which I think you can actually even boost by taking flags, and I'm not sure if Demolition Expert has an effect on the airstrike. It doesn't say that in the description in port, but it might do. I don't know. It might just be flags that have an effect. But yeah, basically you should treat these like primarily tools for setting fires. The temptation is going to be to dump all charges on somebody at once, and if you've got a perfectly stationary target you can do some okay damage, but because they have that high fire chance you are probably better off using the fact that it's likely to set fires with even only a couple of hits to drop one lot and then use them to set some fires with, you know, a sufficiently spaced second drop. The fire chance on the main shells themselves, as I've said, is not bad, but I am running IFHE here for the extra bit of penetration, because by default the HE only has 30mm, and a lot of the ships that you're going to meet will have that important 32mm threshold of armour that you need to beat. So that's how I've approached it, basically, for those times when I want to try and set fires, to use the bombs if possible, and you will still get some fires with the main battery as well. I will say overall, however, that the the airstrikes are tricky to use against anything that isn't stationary, and even stuff that's moving slowly. Unlike torpedoes, there's no kind of sudden pop-in. You know when an airstrike is coming. It's very visible, and there is sufficient time to maneuver. It's a 15-second cooldown, basically, or a 15-second delay as the airstrike is coming in. It's definitely something that takes a bit of practice getting used to, because unlike with your main battery, when you have either the static or dynamic crosshairs on screen to give you some idea of how much lead you need to give, you basically have to just completely eyeball it and hope that you've gotten it right in terms of the enemy's course, in terms of especially their speed, and it doesn't take much maneuvering to throw it off. It is somewhat useful as a tool to get people to maneuver, though. I mean, you might be in a situation where you can manipulate someone into showing some broadside for an ally with bigger guns than you, because 152mm ain't big. This is not a big caliber of gun by any stretch of the imagination. But overall, yeah, I've found them to be it's occasionally useful. It's an occasionally useful thing that most of the time doesn't actually do that much. You'll actually get to see me using the airstrikes quite a bit during this latter part of the battle. Now, unfortunately for me, this synop didn't get the memo. They're definitely doing the usual thing, unlike that Massachusetts earlier, and focusing on the squishy target. Didn't quite give enough lead to that first drop, so we're going to try some more. I'm just trying to get out of range at the moment. Here's where torpedoes would have been a lot more useful. The airstrikes just do not have the same threat as torpedoes do. You cannot go, right, I'm going to get in close and torpedo somebody and have that as an option, that real big kick of close range damage. So hence this is why I am trying to run here. Unfortunately for me, the Vladivostok is going in for the ram, or they're both going in for the ram. So I do manage to get some damage in there, but then they both ram each other. Fortunately, though, extra fortunately, it's always a thing when you're recording. You always start noticing when you're like, oh, I'll just use the same word over and over again, and then just kind of facepalm because it sounds kind of naff. But anyway, they took out the enemy Zeven Provinciën. Because there are people mad enough to have just basically bought their way through the entire dockyard chain already. I would not recommend that. It's not worth that level of money. It absolutely isn't. I don't know if this is going to be available as a regular premium at some point, but I kind of hope it is, because even just as a regular premium Tier 8 cruiser, I would kind of cautiously recommend this. It is, you know, it's on that level. It's not one of the gimped ones. Or at least not excessively gimped feeling as some of the others are. We've come down to this being a really close game. We have a good points lead. I mean, there was some very messy combat going up on in the north, but fortunately we took that mid-cap, and we have taken out a lot of enemy ships, but they've taken out a lot of our ships. Here's where I made a big mistake, by the way. I did a big turn there to starboard rather than port. And if I had maximum stealth, that still wouldn't have been a problem. I still would have been stealthed at the point where the Tirpitz popped into view again. 9.3 kilometers. But as it was, I wasn't. Which is excellent English. At this stage, I am just trying to absolutely keep this Tirpitz from capping. Possibly the wiser course of action would have been to stay unspotted or try and get unspotted. But you'll see from just how many defense flags I rack up here that, yeah, it's quite possibly going to have turned out to have been a crucial decision to keep firing. Now, we saw some planes at the very beginning, and I didn't really talk about AA other than to intimate it's quite good. Yeah, this is one of the areas of the game where, since the CV and AA rework, we can definitely say there's power creep occurring with newer ships having better AA. It's a thing they didn't really do. They didn't go back and go through older ships and sufficiently rebalance AA in my mind. But at least we can say this does have good AA for a cruiser. You don't have a defensive, unfortunately, but you can take some captain skills to which will buff that really good AA considerably. So we didn't get to see it that much in this game, other than the 2 tier 6 squads that I did encounter, but yeah, it's pretty potent, and even against tier 8 carriers, I think it will hold up very well. Against tier 10 carriers, it's going to start to struggle a bit. But it's still pretty powerful, and it's got, more importantly than that, a really good range at 6.9 kilometers with the long range AA because of those dual purpose main guns. So a witherer out of that, 153,000 damage done. 24 bomb hits, which is actually a pretty good game for me in terms of getting the bomb hits. And only 1 kill, but all of that was enough to put me at the top of the team. The Vladivostok 2nd place. That enemy Tirpitz with killing me, 1600 XP and a Kraken. They did really well as well. So yeah, not that many ships overall damaged, but I did a substantial amount of damage to that Massachusetts because of the decision they made not to focus me, and still a pretty significant chunk to that Tirpitz as well. So yeah, overall, that was one of the more interesting and exciting matches that I played in this, and it's kind of not a surprise that it was a top tier game. This thing, as with most tier 10, most tier 8 cruisers rather, in tier 10 games, you have to play a lot more cautiously. So here we are in port for a quick look at some of the things I couldn't really talk about in game because it would have made more sense to just show you. The concealment, which I pointed out was good, 9.3 if you go for full concealment. Even with either concealment expert or the concealment module, you can get 10.4. So you actually have an interesting choice there. You can, in that equipment slot, like I said, you can go for double rudder shift, you can use concealment, or you could use the ship consumables modification, which will give you a boost to both your heal and your engine boost, and you can see that I'm already using the engine boost mod 1 there as well. Alternatively, of course, you could use the concealment module and potentially spend those 4 points on something else. And it being a light cruiser, there's plenty to choose from. You can even potentially go full concealment and take the heavy SAP as an option to get more damage out of your shells. Although I'm not entirely sure that's necessary if you're going to use IFHE. There's not many ships I use heavy HE and SAP on. I think I've got it on my Venezia captain, and that's about it. Overall, though, in terms of captain skills, there's nothing too amazingly special here. Superintendent is a must for anything with a heal, pretty much. I really can't emphasize how much more survivability having a heal gives you in any cruiser. It is a very, very useful tool indeed. Otherwise, you do have the option of potentially boosting up some of your AA skills with some of these, which obviously will give you some extra anti-sub skills as well, although frankly I'm not sold on subs overall. I mean, at the moment subs are only in ranked and co-op anyway, so I don't think there's any point in taking anything on the basis of effectiveness against subs. But yeah, I mean, with IFHE it does significantly reduce your fire chance, although with flags and demo expert I've gotten it back up to 7.5, but you could equally with demo expert get it up to what and flags like 13%, something like that, which is that's quite good for a light cruiser. So that's just what I've been using. Like I said, there's a couple of ways you can dice this up, although I don't think there's too much effective variation here. If you were going to have some other 4-point skill in this slot, it would probably be radio location, or maybe outnumbered, or maybe even top grade gunner. So there are some decisions you can make, and potentially instead of focus fire training, which puts my already, like, it doesn't directly boost the AA output, but it puts that up from 50% to 75%. So for your priority sector focus, it's even more deadly with that. But you could instead have consumables enhancements to give the speed boost an even greater kick than just with the the module. Lastly, I want to look at armour. It's a light cruiser. It's not particularly thickly armoured, although it does have some fairly nice patches. It's got a big old 13mm superstructure, so obviously, you know, that's going to eat all the HE damage. The main section of the deck, though, 27mm even, which is not bad. That will proof you against some IFHE, not even IFHE, some HE. The ends, though, are 25mm, which is what you would expect on a cruiser, and the belt is not particularly tanky. You've got 50mm there and then 75mm there. So, yeah, I think it's more the heel that's giving you your survivability in this thing as compared to the armour. I mean, if we stick up the Harlem on screen just to compare it to its tier 8 tech tree counterpart, that has got what's that, 27mm on the torpedo bulge, and then 200mm on the belt under that. So, you know, this is quite a lot of belt armor for a cruiser in comparison. But yeah, it just kind of shows the difference between the two. Now, if we look at the Citadel, take all the ends away and the casemate armor, it's basically a waterline Citadel. So unless you are in a turn or you take some plunging fire that happens to go into the Citadel, which is a 30mm deck, that's not bad actually. Although I can't remember offhand what that does in terms of AP ricochet angles. But yeah, unless you are in a hard turn where you're healing over a bit, you're probably not going to eat Citadels from the side too much, but you will still eat, you know, penetration damage. So I still don't particularly recommend showing people a lot of broadside. It's not like the small end square. Actually, that can be a good idea sometimes, and you'll end up with just overpens. I'm sure there are plenty of things that could shoot at this and would just end up with overpens. But you know, I don't particularly care to find out, which is why I have that excessive maneuverability. In fact, I've got it down to 4.4 seconds there. So yeah. Now obviously this is all with a 21 point captain, which they have given us, and something I should have said right at the start of the video, where this has all been provided to me by Wargaming, the captain and the ship itself. I haven't spent my way through the dockyard, but yeah, it feels like overall a pretty reasonable ship. I wouldn't say it's the world's most exciting ship, but for a tier 8 light cruiser, I kind of like it. And considering that it's a dockyard ship that, as I've said, you could potentially only spend, what is it, 3,000 doubloons, whatever the basic package is, nearly 4,000 doubloons. Yeah, I would say if you're in the market for it, if you think the Dutch light cruisers might be of interest, and the Dutch cruisers overall, I mean, it certainly makes as I've said, a good captain trainer for the light ones, so it could well be worth that 4,000 doubloons and your time to grind through the dockyard. But if you don't have the time, well, I would not necessarily recommend buying the thing outright. Maybe buy some, like, you could buy both of those booster packages and it would be probably not far off the cost of, I've opened the wrong thing there, I wanted the dockyard. It will probably be not far off the cost of buying it as a tier 8. What would that be together? Probably be a little bit more. That is what, just shy of 13,000, something like that. So that would be a little on the high side, but you know, you could do that and have it be a little more than if you just bought it outright. I would definitely hope that this just gets put on sale at some point as a premium you can buy, though, because yeah, it's pretty nice overall. And I have to give Wargaming a thumbs up on this one. For all the negativity we've had recently, you know, I can at least be positive about this and say it's a fairly nice cruiser overall. So that is it for this first look. Hopefully you have found this informative, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.